everyone, Annette with Sheridan Art and Designs. Welcome to part 5 of Tanjiro's Howery. We'll be doing the final finishing today.
Okay, we've got our sleeves constructed, and now we're going to talk about the lining of the Howery. So the lining is put together the same as the Howery. So you would have your center back, the center back seam, and then this was the lower front lining that's attached to the upper front, and then the side panels are put in place. So you can see, so we have our front, lower front, the side panel, and then our back. So now we have our lining constructed, and you can see I've gone ahead and done the stay stitching around the neckline, and that's simply so that we can clip the corners here on the neckline so it doesn't pucker and it will lay flat as it's put on. So the next step is to insert the lining to the Howery, and we're going to use a method called bagging the lining. And what that means is that we're going to stitch the lining to the outer fabric Howery, and all by machine, and then we'll turn it and press everything up. So the first step, of course, is right sides together. And then I'm going to match up my center back seams. And you're going to match seams all the way around as we do our pinning. So this is my back, this is my center back seam. So I'm going to match my center back seam of the Howery with that of the lining. And you can see that I chose, you could choose to press your seams open, but I chose, because I had all of this patchwork and my seams pressed to one side, I chose to press my lining seams in the opposite direction so that I can nest those seams right there. All right, and then I'm just going to work my way around the entire Howery, matching up the neckline first. There. Making sure that I've got the turn in the corner of the neckline matched up just right. And then just pinning these all the way around. Heading down one front. And again, as I make my way down that front, Always good to have things laid out and flat. But as I lay my front out, I want to make sure that I'm lining up my points on the ends, and that looks like everything's going to fit just perfectly. So match notches, markings, and seams all the way around. And at this stage, we're just going to follow. So we started at the center back here, and we're coming around down the front, all the way down around the front. And then I'm going to want to go around the bottom. And again, matching the notches and our side seams up. Hard to do this when you're holding it up for the camera. Usually lay it flat on the table. So I'm going to work my way all the way around the bottom. And normally I would leave you want to leave an opening. If this was a jacket with a normal set-in sleeve, we would leave an opening in the sleeve lining to turn. But because we haven't set our sleeves yet, we'll be able to use this opening where the sleeve is going to go to turn it right side out. So everything will be fine. Just continue pinning all the way down around the bottom, back up the other side, and meet back at the center back. All right, so we have our lining pinned to our jacket all the way around. So you can see we've got it going all the way down the front and around the bottom. At this point, we're not doing anything with the sleeves. The sleeves are left open and unpinned at this point. So the next step is to stitch this all the way around. So up the fronts around the neckline, down the next front, and around the back. So we'll head off to the sewing machine and get that done. Okay, we've stitched all the way around the Howery. So all the way down the fronts, the bottom, and around the neckline. We've left the sleeve openings open, and I've pinked all of my edges, and I clipped the neckline. So here you can see that my stitching is still intact, but I did take my snips and I went diagonally at a 45 right into that corner, and I went very close to the stitching, but I did not go through the stitching. So I'm about a 1/16 of an inch away from that stitching. That will allow this to open up and flex as we turn the garment, and then it's worn over the shoulders. And we're going to use the same pressing technique that I did on the sleeve. So we're just going to roll the seam allowances back until we get that seam right up to the top and open, and then we're just going to roll it to the inside just about 1/8 of an inch, so it looks just like this. And then the bottom, you can actually, there's a couple of different ways you can do the bottom. If you were doing like a suit jacket, for example, you would have an extended piece that comes down, and that's the hem of the jacket, and that would get folded up, and you would tack the seam allowances before you turned it. You would tack the seam allowances up. That would fold the outer fabric up, and then it blouses. So you can do the same thing here. If you choose to, then it blouses the lining, and then you would just press. And what that does is it allows some movement for the lining, so it doesn't roll up on the bottom. It doesn't come up. Okay, we're almost done with the Haori. We're just putting on the finishing touches now. The last step is to attach the sleeve to the garment. And so we've already have our lining attached and pressed out, and everything's looking very nice. So we're ready to attach the sleeve to the garment. And I've already done one to show you what it will look like. So you can see this is the stitch line where I've attached the sleeve to the garment, and because we were careful about how we placed our patterns when we cut our fabric out, we now are able to match the patchwork very nicely and able to keep that 4-inch finished square just nicely, so it gives a seamless view of the patchwork without any interruption of seams. And then we have the end of the sleeve finished off. We did that in the last step when we bagged the lining to the sleeve, so that's all done and nicely pressed out. And you can see we rolled it so that none of the white lining is showing. Bottom's finished off nicely, and then we have the opening here to the inside of the garment, which is also finished off. So we're going to show you how to do all of that in this next step. So attaching the sleeve to the Haori, we're going to, it's going to line up just like this. And we have our lining, a sleeve and the lining done here as well as on the garment. And these two are going to go together. So the first thing we want to do is actually turn the Haori inside out. And I'm gonna flip it around. Tuck that sleeve up there so it's out of the way. All right, so we have our Haori laying flat on the table, turned inside out. Don't want to stretch that next line there. There we go. It gets heavy with all of the linings and everything in. All right, here we go. So we have our sleeve. This is the rounded finished corner down here. And then this is the front of the Haori inside out. So we're going to put right sides together, just like we did with the lining. So we're just going to slide that sleeve right inside. And we've made our markings on the sleeve, just like we did with all of the other pieces. And we want to be careful that we are, they're here somewhere. There we go. So there's our chalk dot. And then I have another one on the other side. So we're going to be matching those up, but we also want to be careful to match up these seams, so that we're going to go right back to nesting those seams. So this is the Haori and this is the sleeve, and I want to make sure that my shoulder line on the Haori and the shoulder line on the sleeve go straight across. And so, and we want to match all of those seams up. So we will be nesting these. I'm gonna pull the lining away for just a minute. I'm going to do the same thing with the lining in the sleeve. I'm just kind of tucking it up under there so that all we're dealing with right now is the sleeve and the garment. Okay, so just going to roll that lining back. We're going to set the outer fabric first, and then we'll finish off the lining. So I'll show you how to do that. All right, so here's our dot that's matching up, and that's matching up with that dot there. And you'll also see that those dots are lined up so that I can nest these two seams. And what will happen is that that's how we'll keep that seamless patchwork. So we just want to nest those seams and pin them in place. Spin this around a little bit. There we go. And I'm going to do the same for all the way around to the other side where the other dot is. We're going to stop right at those chalk dots. So only about 1/2 to 3/4 of the sleeves, about a little more than 1/2 of the sleeve is being set in this way. So we're going to just stitch in this 1/2 loop here, and then we'll be ready to finish off the rest of it. All right. Okay, we have our seam stitched, and I've pinked the edge of the seam allowance so everything's neat and tidy on the inside. And now it's time to press. We need to press this seam towards the sleeve. So you can see I've pulled the sleeve out of the garment, and then the lining, this is the sleeve lining out here. So I've got the Howery here laying flat and the sleeve, and I'm just using my wool pressing mat. I've got a piece of wood under there so that the heat doesn't transfer down to my cutting mat. I don't want to warp my cutting mat. All right, and then I'm going to use my pressing roll. I'm just going to insert that. You can see the roll there. And then I'm going to press my seam towards the sleeve. And then I'm going to do one clip right here at where our stitching ends. I'm going to bring those seam allowances together, and I'm just going to do a small clip right there, right where the chalk dot is. So you can see I've made just a small clip right here, and then that will allow me, I'm going to be careful to take it close to but not through the stitching, and what that will allow me to do is I can press this portion of the seam towards the sleeve, and then when we do to finish off, we can lay that flat and tuck it under, and we'll have a nice finish. So just that little clip there. And then we just start at the edge, and you can give it a little bit of steam if you like. I have my clapper handy because I do want this seam to lay nice and flat. Careful if you're using steam on your make sure your hand and fingers are out of the way. All right, and I'm just going to put my clapper on that for just a second. All right, so that's nicely pressed to the sleeve. Almost had a catastrophic accident there. Almost knocked my pins off the table. All right, and then we're just going to roll. Just keep turning the Howery, and then we're just going to keep rolling that and insert your roll. Just shift it down till you have the next part of the seam. I like to kind of just tuck that down so we have a nice, there's nothing puckering or getting caught under there. It's nice and flat. And then just coming across and rolling that seam over. And then again with the clapper. And this will help that seam just lay nice and flat. And it won't roll up and bother you. It won't pucker inside the lining or anything like that. All right. Get the lining out of the way there. And then we need to do, we're at the other end, so we need to do that same little clip right to, but not through the stitching. Stuff that down. So we've got everything pressed towards the sleeve. So we're ready to bring that back together now. And everything looks good. We had everything lined up. We've got our seams all lined up. It all turned out perfect. Okay. So now the last thing that we have to do is close off these two openings. And it's actually one opening. It goes from here around down the edge of the sleeve and back up to the side of the Howery. So like this. So we have to close that off, and we have to do that by hand. So the first thing that we can do is this outer one here. And then what we'll do is open that up. So once we have this done, then we'll open the jacket up and we'll slip stitch this whole seam. So this whole seam here will be done by hand, and we're going to pin those together just like that, and then slip stitch those all the way around, and it will be all done, and it will look just like this. So you can see I've slip stitched that shut. Okay, I've turned our Howery inside out just so we can get to the lining. Everything's laying nice and flat. and we're going to start down here at the bottom of the sleeve. The reason why we're going to do that is because we want these seams to match up. So I'm matching the seam of the lining to the seam of the sleeve, the bottom seam of the sleeve, and I'm, just like we did with the roll when we pressed it, I'm lining this up so that it's just about 1/8 of an inch. See if you can see that. So it's just about 1/8 of an inch to the inside because we don't want the white to peek through. So I'm going to stitch that down. Just like that. Okay, so you can see we have everything pinned. The front of the Howery to the sleeve. And this won't lay like that once I have it stitched. It will lay flat. It will look just like this, actually. So this is where I stitched the sleeve to the Howery, all the way around to the front. And then this is where I'd like to show you, because this is the transition point. So I started down at the bottom and worked my way up, and I got to the spot where the opening for the sleeve happens, right? For the lower sleeve. So this space here, this opening, is so that you can put your hand through it and get to the inside of the Howery. So if you had a pocket or something on the inside, you could do that. So starting here, I stitched up and I just slip stitched this by hand, and you can't see the stitches on the other side. So I'm only going through one layer of fabric, not both layers. So just that top layer that I folded over, that's all I'm picking up, and the same with the lining. So only one layer each. And then here, what I did was I actually tacked this down to the outer Howery, just to give it a little extra staying power, I guess, so that it would stay put, and you wouldn't have this, with this opening, you wouldn't have the lining sliding around. So I tacked it right there at the top of that opening, and then I transitioned into sewing the lining together here. So you can see that slip stitched together, and I just took my time. And I know it's hard to see, it's white on white on white, but that is the seam, and that's what you want it to look like, right? You don't want to be able to see those stitches. And my stitches are about 1/16 of an inch long, maybe 1/8, but not longer than that. So I'm taking very small stitches. That way they'll be very strong. So the longer the stitch you take, the weaker the stitch will be. So I'm taking small stitches, taking my time, and just working my way around. Some of the things that you might need for this: thimbles are great. I don't like the hard ones because they tend to slide off my fingers a lot. So this is just me. I just took one of those rubber fingertips that you use for like paperwork in the office, and I just cut the end of it off, and so it protects the end of my finger, but it still allows me to feel the fabric underneath. Pick your favorite hand sewing needle. I use a number 10 Milner's needle, and I'm going to use a 60 weight cotton thread because I don't want a big bulky thread. I want a nice thin thread that will hide. I'm not going to make my thread length too long because I don't want it to tangle. When you're doing hand sewing, if you really make your thread really nice and long because you don't want to stop and start a lot, you risk your thread doing this, tangling up and creating a big knot. And I don't want to do that. The other thing, there is a right and wrong way to thread your needle. So you want to, here, I'll do it again. So as the thread comes off the spool, you want to put this end through the eye of your needle. And that is because the way the thread is manufactured with the different plies, if it's a 2-ply or a 3-ply thread, it's manufactured and rolled in this direction. So if you go in this direction, you'll be going with the grains of the thread, with the fibers of the thread, instead of if you thread it at this end, the end that you cut off the spool, and have the needle go in the other way, you'll be fighting the fibers of the thread all the time, and you'll find that your thread may knot more easily. So that's just a little tip. And I'm just going to cut my thread there. The other thing I have is Thread Magic. You can use beeswax, all kinds of products out there. But essentially what you're doing is you're conditioning your thread. Just going to push this down into the wax. Yep, you're just coating and conditioning your needle, and you're just going to pull through. Pull it all the way through. And then that can go away. I'm just going to take my fingers and run that a couple of times and roll the thread between my fingers to make sure that the thread is nicely coated and conditioned. All right, the last thing I need is my glasses. Now, simple slip stitch. I'm going to start, I'll start here at where we started pinning, where the seams come together. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is go the opposite direction, and I'm only picking up one layer, so that inner layer of the white fabric. And the reason why I'm doing that, I was going to bury my knot, but I didn't make a knot. So let's make the knot. There we go. All right. So I'm going in the opposite direction. So for me, that's right to left. And it's just because I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of the fabric there. Again, not going all the way through to the top. You can't see my thread there. And I'm just pulling my knot down in there. If I pull it back, you can see it. So I just want to tuck that little tail in there. And now I'm good to go. So the slip stitch, I'm going to come in. I'm working right to left just because I'm right-handed, and that's what's comfortable for me. You can certainly do this left to right. So whatever works for you. But I'm going to go down, and I'm not picking it up here at the top. That's where it's visible. I'm going actually below, so I'm going to slide my needle down that green fabric below where the white is. So you can't see my needle now. And I'm just picking up a tiny bit, just a tiny bit of that green fabric. Doesn't have to be a big chunk, only a few fibers is all you need. Just a tiny bit. And then I'm going to do the same on the white. I'm going to pull this apart so you can see what I'm doing. So see, I have my tiny bit of green on the needle there. And then just picking up just that top layer of the white. And then I'm going to come straight up. And you can see I didn't I didn't come all the way through on the fabric. Pull your thread. And you don't have to yank it real tight. Snug is fine. Yep. And you'll find a rhythm for this. A little bit too long. Here we go. Okay. So again, pick up a little green, pick up a little white, and come straight up through. And as I said, you'll get faster at this the more you do it. You get the hang of it. It takes about an inch, and then you'll kind of get the feel of the fabric. You'll feel, and I keep my fingers right underneath where I'm poking the needle, and that's so that, one, I can hold the fabric nice and tight, but also so that if I feel that needle coming through, I know I need to back it off. So that's kind of my safety net, or how I feel. Whether or not I've gone through to all the way through, because you don't want to do that. All right, so let's see how we did. The pin is where I started. You can see no stitches here, but you can see our stitches there. So that's the slip stitch. It's also known as the whip stitch. And we're going to do that all the way around.
Thank you for watching. The Howery's all finished. Stay tuned for our next video series where we tackle Tanjiro's jacket and pants. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. If you're so inclined, stop by in the comments section and say hi, and feel free to ask any questions. I hope these videos are helping you learn new sewing skills in the world of cosplay and hopefully inspire you to create your own. If there are projects that you would like to see a video on, please let us know in the comments section. Until next time, be safe, be happy, and keep creating.
悲しみ